Are any of your postnatal clients reporting symptoms of new anxiety, vaginal dryness, joint pain, or inability to stay asleep even when they have the opportunity to do so? If so, these clients may be experiencing more than postpartum shifts. In today's episode, I talk with physical therapist Dr. Carrie Pagliano about the similarities of the postnatal timeframe and perimenopause. Hello, friends. This is Lynn Schulte, and you are listening to the Birth Healing Summit podcast. We are here for meaningful conversations that will transform the way you work with pregnant and postpartum clients. Whether it is a new perspective, tool, or technique, you'll be able to implement it into your practice today. I invite you to sit back, listen with an open mind, and grab the golden nugget today's guest has to offer. Now let's get started.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to this episode. And boy, I am so thrilled to have with us Carrie Pagliano. She is a physical therapist, a pelvic health physical therapist in the Denver. I'm in Denver. You're in the DC area.
I'll move to Denver. You guys have some great, things to do
Yeah,
out there.
you would love it out here with all the mountains and everything we have.
I
It's
would.
awesome. Yes,
I
yeah.
would.
But you're on the East Coast. I'm in central of the States. So welcome to the podcast, Carrie. Thanks so much for being here.
Thanks so much for having me and inviting me to move to Denver.
Yeah.
I love it.
Yeah, well, come out and visit anytime. I have a huge house, lots of bedrooms.
Awesome.
You can come stay with me anytime. Anyone's welcome.
Perfect.
Okay, so today we'd like to talk a little bit about, we're going to dive into the topic of the postnatal conditions that moms are in and how they're very similar to our perimenopausal symptoms and issues that women are developing then, right? So,
Yeah.
Carrie, tell us about that. What do we need to know?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I think it's something that it's always been the case. And we're only having this discussion because I feel like the menopause conversation has become front and center now that the WHI from 2001 has kind of been debunked and people are interested in HRT again, hormone replacement therapy, and it's safe and you're not going to get breast cancer and that sort of thing.
Hang
So
on. I
oh
wanna
yeah.
the WHI in 2001. Can you just explain that for some people who are like,
Yeah.
"What the heck is
So
that?"
there was a research group back in the late 1990s, early 2000s that basically they started doing research on whether HRT, hormone replacement therapy, if there was going to be any sort of adverse impact. And initially, they actually stopped the study because of these supposed findings that when you actually go back in the rear view, very, very tiny chances of increased likelihood of breast cancer. But of course, the media took it. I think it was like Ann Curry on the Today Show, took it, blew it up. There's all sorts of kind of looks back on this now that it actually the data set was looking mostly at, again, women over, I think it was mid 60s or something along those lines. Either way, it was just misinterpreted, but they pulled so many women off of hormone replacement therapy. And like I've talked to my mom about this. She was on it, got pulled off of it, plummeted right back into, the fun parts of menopause, including hot flashes, anxiety, night sweats, kind of all that nasty stuff. And
Yeah.
so the last few years, I think probably this year especially, there's been some real concerted voices out there saying, hey, we got this wrong. It was interpreted incorrectly. Women should be treated for perimenopause, low estrogen states symptomatically. We don't need to wait until the menses has stopped. We can do this sooner. We can, affect these symptoms, which honestly, the 60 plus symptoms of perimenopause and menopause kind of overlap. Being a mom of a couple of kids and a day job in this day and age, having just gone through the last, 4 or 5 years with a global pandemic, like
Yeah.
anxiety, can't sleep, like, so we didn't really know. And so now that we're talking about this more, we're also reflecting back and saying, okay, well, what other low estrogen, seasons do we have in our life? Voila, immediate postpartum, because in pregnancy, our estrogen's incredibly high. And this was the other thing in the WHI study. They're saying, estrogen, high levels of estrogen is going to predispose you to breast cancer. Well, every single woman who bears a child has these high levels of estrogen, and actually that's not the case. Women who have kids do not have an increased likelihood of breast cancer. Um, so again, these two phases, we're kind of looking at them and saying, are there far more similarities than we think? And there was a study published just last week looking at a new kind of designation, genitourinary symptoms of
Yeah.
lactation, which is
Yeah.
a parallel of genitourinary symptoms of menopause. So those are talking kind of sexual dysfunction, painful sex, urinary issues, including leakage and things like that. And I think there's far more parallels that we're going to find. But again, it's looking at these stations in our life where we have normal fluxes and expectations for low estrogen. And at least where I live in the DC area, like my average postpartum patient is in their late 30s, early 40s. And so when you're potentially you can have perimenopausal symptoms up to 10 years, and the average American woman hits menopause at 51. Back that up a little bit. Now, all of a sudden, we're talking in your 40s.
Yeah.
And this is actually something I experienced this year. Voila. So it made me look a lot closer at it. And really, there's a lot more overlap. And again, we gaslight ourselves as moms and say,
Mhm.
oh, this is just what being a mom is like. And really, it's the estrogen.
Yeah. Oh, I specifically still remember how dry I was
Yes.
vaginally after having babies. Like it was
Mm-hmm.
crazy, crazy, crazy.
Mm-hmm.
And so I have to share the story because we have to help our clients find the right doctors, like to
Yes.
find the right. I had one client that she came in and she said one doctor would not give her any estrogen. And so
Right.
she actually, okay, I'm not supporting this, everybody, but she got some estrogen from a friend and started taking it on her own, and she felt amazing.
When you're desperate. Yeah.
Right, she was. She totally was. And
Yeah.
so then she went to a different provider and she's like, "Oh no, we have to get you on it." And she feels amazing now. So,
Yeah.
but when I was going through that, I just had a baby, really dry down there.
Yeah.
I actually had this provider. She was an OBGYN, but she was very much into more the spiritual things. She was just like, "Okay, Lynn, you need to increase your connection to your pelvic space, do some movement down there, like get things moving and everything." And I thought that was so fun that she like was trying to come outside the box. But
Yeah.
I have a big history of breast cancer in my family.
Mm.
So both mom and sister had
Yep.
it. And I had a scare towards it. But so I'm very, very careful about all that. Um,
Mhm.
but I'm glad to hear that, it seems like the pendulum's swinging to the other side around this with as far as
Yeah.
like, we're not gonna do it. Now we are. It is okay to give women the
Yeah.
support that they need.
Yep. Yeah, and even with the breast cancer, I do think that there's some papers that have come out looking at local topical estrogen that it's and again, this is the
Yeah,
conversation around postpartum is it systemic? Is it going to affect milk supply? Because
right,
if
yeah,
you have gone through all the trouble to try and breastfeed and it's work, you're not going to stop that just because you're a little dry down there or it
right,
hurts to have sex. Like that's just going to get punted.
yeah,
But what I think some of the more recent research is looking at is because it's local, you should be fine. Again, obviously, this is not medical advice. Talk to your
right.
physician specifically. And again, I think now that we have this conversation going, again, just normalizing the conversation around can we do something about these symptoms? And again, understanding, and I have a 10-year-old daughter, and I'm very interested in what she learns in health class because it's basically still the stupid cross section of the pelvis that we got, when we were in school. But let them understand that estrogen isn't for girls and testosterone isn't just
Right.
for boys. It's like we have both.
Oh,
And
yeah.
estrogen is in our urinary tract, it's in our reproductive system, it's in our brain, it's in our blood vessels, and understanding like things like urination. We have a huge amount of blood vessels in our urethra, and
Mm,
that's partly what helps us with continence is kind of building up that integrity. And when we have symptoms that come up in a low estrogen state, and I have some people too that completely unrelated to perimenopause or menopause, they have cyclic urinary symptoms or cyclic prolapse symptoms. and they can connect it to that lower estrogen phase of their cycle. Like once you start to understand the intricacies of how estrogen impacts our body, then you can kind of start to ask some intelligent questions like, oh, I am in a low estrogen state. Could this explain my brain fog? Could this explain my increased anxiety? All things that we're talking about in perimenopause and menopause, but can we pull it back and talk about it in postpartum? And we blame all that stuff on, oh, you have postpartum depression because you had a baby and, there's too much going on. Or again, but we
Yeah.
need to talk about this stuff sooner. Our kids need to know
Yeah.
that this is the role of like perfectly normal hormones in our body. And they have a lot of jobs to do. And we need to be able to reflect on, hey, this is how I'm feeling. What else is going on physiologically so we can understand.
Yeah, gosh, Carrie, it just takes me down like there's so many research possibilities
Oh,
here,
yeah. Yeah.
right? Like I would love to looking at postpartum depression.
Yeah.
How much of that is hormonal? How much of is it trauma from the
Yep.
birth,
Probably all the above.
right?
Yep.
And I just want moms to have more support around all
Mhm.
that.
Yeah.
And
Well, and as a provider, I think um, us as PTs, I think it's incredibly important because we have that sit down time with people.
yes,
And it's not that, 5 minutes in and out, and you really get to understand what's going on and that, hey, these things we can, let's talk to your OB about dryness because you
yeah,
might think that it's normal. This is a quick fix. Like this is easy. It's not going to affect your breast milk. We can make this better. Or if you're having depression and it's not being helped with counseling or something like that, do we need to have a discussion
right.
about these other things? So
Yeah.
for us, I think it's incredibly important to understand because we have the ability to almost be like the social services of postpartum, where we need to refer people out to kind of
Yes.
the appropriate people that can help.
Yeah, that's so, so critical. I just got the chills there when you were talking about that, being able to support our moms and
Yeah.
refer them out to the right person
Yep.
and to help them to know, man, if your doctor's not willing to do this, go find another one.
Yeah. Well, again, and we talked a little bit before hopping on here about the ability to question your provider. And we've been limited historically by our geography and what we had access to. And, one of the benefits of, a global pandemic, other than delivery margaritas, really is, that was nice for a while.
Yeah.
Um, is having access to experts literally all over the world. Like where I am in DC,
Yeah.
we have a large population of military families, State Department, Foreign Service, that sort of thing. So we have families that come here for language training and then they'll go off elsewhere in the world and sometimes don't have great resources. And so having the ability to learn and understand and say, okay, well, I might not have this here, but that doesn't mean that I can't, continue to work on, issues that I'm having or ask questions of providers. Or even if you're here in the States, like if your doctor's telling you, no, you don't need PT postpartum, or no, you don't need vaginal estrogen. I literally had a patient tell me that that's just a fad, just like Ozempic. I'm like, no.
Yeah.
But it allows us to question our providers and say, are you the best match for me? Which historically, we held our providers in such high
Yeah.
regard that they knew everything. And now we're understanding that might not be the case. And I don't think that's a bad thing. That's going to make people really level up and really be a good resource for patients if they want to continue to have them.
Right. Yes. The pandemic was good for so many things. And having that ability to reach, for the rural population to
Very
have
much,
access
very
to
much so.
more care, right? Yeah. So,
Yeah,
but
I still do a lot of telehealth.
do you?
It's also great for moms that have sick kids. In the last two
Yeah.
years, kids are sick 24/7. So if mom can't, I mean, of course, if kid's sick, mom's going to have to be the one
Right.
to stay home. And for her to put her healthcare on the back burner again, that's no good. So we just switch automatically over to telehealth. Sick kid, you're home with a sick kid. Everybody keeps their germs to themselves. You can still get your care. It works. It
Yeah. Yeah.
works.
That's awesome. That's
Yeah.
awesome. So cool. So anything else that you want us to be aware of when it comes to this change that happens in that
I think
postpartum?
the biggest thing to understand is, again, I think historically, we're taught to we can't do anything until we've had that year where we haven't had a period. And again, moms that are breastfeeding, sometimes that period doesn't come back till after you stop breastfeeding. Sometimes it comes back before. There's still a lot we don't know about that. Um, it's not abnormal to have a flux in periods after, when it starts to come back, it can be a little wonky. But I think the important thing is it doesn't have to be that. Like, just understanding symptoms like joint pain, new anxiety, insomnia, these things, again, not to gaslight yourself. I went through this in the fall. I had been on continuous birth control for about 7 years. I'd done an IUD before that, hated it, had done this, and then noticed over the last 4 or 5 years, my blood pressure had been going up. And I was like, you know what, this is what it is. Let me come off. And I came off, and my cycle didn't come back. And before, if I'd missed a pill or two, I would get some spotting, and this was nothing. And so I reached out to my mom. I'm like, hey, when did you go through menopause? And she's like, oh, 41. And I was 47 at that point. I'm like, whoa, that would have been really nice to know like 6 years ago.
Right.
Because there is correlation between like when your mom did and when you did, or a sister. And so what I also was going on during that time was I was waking up a million times at night. I would wake up and be hot. I was blaming, we have a little 18-pound border terrier. And I was like, oh my God, she's so hot. We've had her for 4 years. It's not the dog. And I
Ah,
mean, there were all these reasons that I could be like, oh, well, this is just happening. And I'm like, wait a second. No. And I had a great local provider that I've known for a really long time. She's like, hey, let's run some things real quick. Sure enough, that's the case. And she was very good about getting me on treatment that addressed my symptoms very quickly. Funny thing is, 2 months later, symptoms still great. Everything's check. I'm literally questioning whether I experienced those things. Was I really waking up that many times at night? Was I really that hot? And I'm like, why am I doing this to myself? I know better, but it's funny how we like, did I really go through that? Yes, I did. And I remember sitting there thinking, this is not normal. You are not an anxious person. You are not a hot person, like all these things.
ah, yeah,
So I think the take home there is, this is my literal day job, and I still was questioning myself. So trust your gut, write it down if you have to, so you don't think you're crazy, but trust that those symptoms, you can go get treated if you have an informed provider that isn't going to make you wait.
right, right. Yeah, that's so important. Wow, why is that we question ourselves so
Huh.
much? And we're in the healthcare field. We know
I
this
know.
stuff, right? Can you imagine what a layperson who knows nothing? And that's how it's so easy for a
Yeah.
doctor to gaslight them.
Yep.
And yeah, so as providers, as we are listening to our clients talk, because we have so much time with them,
Yep.
we need to be paying attention and we need to be asking the questions.
Yes.
How is your sleep? How is your anxiety? Are you having hot flashes? And these are things that we need to become aware of to see if we can support them better in that postnatal and perimenopausal period for
Yeah.
our clients, and know that there's support. So this idea that estrogen or hormone replacement therapy isn't as scary as was once
Right.
led to be believed, which, Carrie, I have to say, I know research is so important,
Hmm.
but and God, this was even highlighted even more during the pandemic, and how it can be misinterpreted
Yeah.
both
Yeah.
ways,
Hmm.
both ways.
Yep.
And I just and how it can um influence our practice, possibly to the detriment, like this has done all those years.
Well, and what's interesting is, I think just the conversation in general around hormones, birth control, that sort of thing. Um, there's been this push, I think on social media, probably TikTok, being like, oh, if you're on the pill, it's it's artificial, you should come off of it. And so you have all these girls that were put on the pill when they were teenagers because they had strong, painful periods.
Mhm.
And they decide in their 20s they want to come off of it, or later on they want to come off of it and get pregnant. And then all of a sudden, all those awful pain period symptoms come back because guess what? They all had endometriosis. And so I'm having so many patients now where we're like reverse diagnosing endometriosis that was missed 10, 15 years ago. Because they were just like, oh, strong, painful periods, here, have the pill. Um, and they actually do need that to mitigate a lot of their symptoms. So again, like it's kind of like eh, we forget why we got on this stuff in the first place.
Yeah.
It was like
Yeah.
to give us some freedom. It's not evil. Hormones aren't bad. They're not artificial. Like we use them and we need them to manage certain situations, but you need to be informed about what's right for you.
Yeah.
And to your point, you could say the same thing about, exercise or all these other things. It's like, as long as you understand what you need in what season in your life, and any predispositions you have kind of genetically or otherwise, like, I think it's okay to make good choices. But when we start playing, swinging the pendulum, which everything does,
Yeah.
we gotta end up in the middle somewhere sometime.
Right. Yeah. And sometimes it takes a long time to find that middle,
Yeah.
unfortunately.
You could say that about a lot of things. I might
Yeah.
be doing a segue here that you didn't see coming, but like you could say the same thing. We were talking a little bit earlier about prolapse. Like,
Yeah.
um, go back to 2013, and our whole field was up in arms because, and even with leakage, like I do CrossFit and I'm a runner, and our whole profession, there was a video out from CrossFit saying it was okay to leak when you lift,
Yeah.
and that was a sign of you were working hard enough. And we're like, yeah, you shouldn't leak, but we're like, we don't have any options. We don't know how to tell you what to do. Fast forward 10 years later, we've got PTs having businesses based out of CrossFit boxes. We have, postpartum return to CrossFit and running and programs and all sorts of things like that, where we were like, you know, you can't do this. This is bad. This is awful. And now, like women are doing these things. We need to find solutions to it. So the pendulum really, a lot, most everything, it swings.
Well, that and DR as well.
Oh
Diastasis
God.
is right?
My biggest joke is that like 99% of women in Northern Virginia think that they have diastasis recti, like dysfunctional stuff.
Yeah.
And it's literally like 1 or 2%, but it's the gateway postpartum issue, is like people will come in for diastasis, but then let slip, oh, I have leakage, or, oh, I have
Uh-huh.
prolapse symptoms. And I'm
Yeah.
like, okay, so guess what the bigger problem is?
It's
Not
all
your
related.
diastasis. No. Yeah.
Right. Well, it's funny because I teach a class to moms, and you said the belly is the gateway to getting people
Mhm.
in and getting them in. And so
Yep.
I had a class that it was how to lose the postpartum pooch for good.
Yep.
And Carrie, I have to tell you, I have tried, and I have gotten some slack about that name, and that it's derogatory, and that it's
Mhm.
but I tell you what, I try all different sorts of names. You're like, what to do with the belly after birth? What to,
Mm-mm.
DR screening. Nothing
Mm-mm.
gets me the results in my marketing and gets women in the door
Yeah.
than how to lose the postpartum pooch for good.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's 100% true. And it makes me just grit my teeth a little bit, because I get it. I just did a local workshop. We rehabilitate your abs. Um, and yeah, we're gonna talk about that for about 10 minutes. And
Right.
then you come for what you think you want, and then I will give
And
you
I'm going to
what you
tell you what you
need.
need to know.
Yeah. Yeah. So that and I hate to like talking about the postpartum pooch and that kind of stuff. And love handles are completely different than diastasis, da da da, all that other stuff. But
Right.
it's marketing versus what people need clinically. It's just
Yeah.
unfortunate
It's such,
fact.
and I totally get it. I don't want to shame
Hmm.
anybody. I don't,
Hmm.
like I want to be supportive to that process and, all that stuff. But when it comes to marketing and getting
I know.
people's attention, it freaking works.
I know. But then you
And
get to be the Oprah of diastasis. I'm like, you get your, push-ups back, you get your planks back. Like, that's fun. And they're like, okay, great, I can do all this stuff again. I'm like, wonderful. What else could we do?
right?
So
Oh my gosh, talk about the pendulum. Don't ever dome. Don't ever dome.
Well, and that's a funny one too. So I ended up with diastasis after my second. So I had two C-sections, ended up with it after my second. And again, this she's 10, so almost 11. So I mean, if you think back, we were still doing the whole thing where you put the TheraBand around your waist and pull both sides together. And
Oh my
if we
God.
do exercises in that position, it'll learn. No, it doesn't. It doesn't work like that.
Oh no.
And Anthony Lowe, who you and I both know, took a course with him. And this is like very early on when he was teaching. And he's like, Carrie, you're just weak. I'm like, huh, okay. And sure enough, that's the case. And now my diastasis, it's a party trick that I have. Like it literally is just like, you want me to cone and dome? I can make it happen. You want me to not cone and dome? I can make that happen. It's like a neuromuscular strategy. I can make it dance. I can make it do whatever you want. And I think when you explain it that way, people don't get quite so freaked out about it.
Yeah.
But I understand because again, we weren't, and I think, to go full circle, I am seeing a lot of women now, my vintage, so like late 40s, early 50s, who the messaging they still have in their brain about leakage, prolapse, diastasis is exactly what existed, 10, 15 years ago. Don't do this, don't do that. And they haven't done any of this stuff. Now they're rolling into perimenopause and menopause. They never got their leakage addressed. They never strengthened their abs. And then things are worse because they're in a low estrogen state. And I'm like, it's not too late to go back and rehab those things. But they don't understand. And you wouldn't if you weren't in this space. Like I treat completely differently than I did a year ago, 5 years ago,
Oh,
10
me
years
too.
ago.
Absolutely.
So it's almost like we need to do like a cliff notes, like get caught up on, oh, this is what's happened in pelvic therapy in the last, 10 years. Let me get you caught up so you're not behind the eight ball when you go into perimenopause and menopause.
Oh my gosh.
Um,
It's so important because
yeah.
I'm in menopause myself. And oh my gosh, the strength that, like trying to keep up and
Yep.
keep yourself strong or get yourself
Hmm.
strong after you've lost it. Because
Yep.
I was an athlete. I used to do a lot and now I'm playing tennis and tennis is my activity. But I realized I got too good for my level so that it wasn't really exercise anymore for me.
Oh, yeah.
Oh my God, Carrie, I was misleading myself thinking, oh, I'm exercising. I was literally standing on the court, walking around on the court.
Oh, geez. He's
So
like,
I
I'm that
really
good.
got myself defeated, like that I
Yeah.
just, and then also too, I'm in my 50s and there's something about the 50s, everybody. If you haven't gotten there yet, you will. You just don't give a flying flip anymore.
Oh, I don't care now.
Yeah.
I'm all ready to go. I'll be 48 in a couple weeks. I am ready to go. I have zero Fs to give. Like we're ready for 50s right now.
Awesome. You're all warmed up for it.
Totally.
But it's like I've spent my whole lifetime pushing my body. And I've
Mhm,
I've done the triathlons, I've done the
mhm.
marathons, and it's just like, I don't wanna do it anymore. But I have to tell you, I really wish I would have kept up a regular routine of lifting weights and
Yes.
exercise because, man, it's a
Mhm.
lot harder to build muscle mass, I
It
feel.
is, but I think also I was really lucky. I started lifting when my youngest was 3. Um, And partially because I had a hip FAI surgery 17 or 18 years ago. And so what we understand about load and rehab now, like that's what made my hip feel good so I could run.
Oh,
But I was learning all of these things in a body that was postpartum. I didn't know, my body didn't know this before that. And the beautiful thing about lifting is I've been doing it 7 years. I keep getting PRs. I'm getting older and getting stronger, which you might not be getting faster in your running or things like that, but I'm getting better with my lifts. I'm getting stronger, and that's a really cool thing to kind of feel when you still have that drive and whatnot. But
right,
I'm planting that seed in our postpartum moms and saying, "Hey, if this is not something you're already doing, if you're a runner, if you're an athlete, we do have great data to say to do." Lifting resistance is going to make your performance better in running. We've got good data to support that. We know that it's helpful for improving bone density, looking ahead at menopause induced osteoporosis, those sorts of things. I'm like, might as well start now So that's one less thing you've got to do or worry about when you hit peri, whenever that is. And plus you kind of feel badass. So it's a win-win, you know?
Absolutely. And I wish I would have followed that advice because I went, that was as I was heading into menopause is when my activity level really took a
Mm,
dive. And
yeah.
and so hindsight is 50 or 2020, right? I'm happy where I'm at now, but it's been quite the struggle to get there again.
But
Versus keeping it.
this is the thing. I've been talking a lot about history this year because especially a lot of the younger PTs, I'm like, they're asking, why are we still having, why is there no research here? Why are we, doing this, that, whatever? Like some of the, like, let's just look at CrossFit, for example, because it's probably the more popular than Olympic lifting. Women were just getting allowed into these gyms in the late 2000s. Okay. Um, and then early 2010s, we're starting to get women being like, okay, maybe I can be pregnant and postpartum and work out and be here. Like we were just getting a space in the room because before that, all it was Gold's gyms and those teeny tiny little like tank tops and Arnold Schwarzenegger and all that crap.
Yeah,
We did not have a seat at the table. And so then we got the seat at the table and we started to perform at different phases of the lifespan. And then you start to run into, okay, well, what are the variables? What are the things we're running into? What are the challenges? Because you can't fix something when you're not in the room.
right.
And that's why there's been so much change in just the last 10 years, the last 5 years. And as far as research grows, if you've, Christine, you wrote a great book, Up to Speed, kind of looking at this across the female athlete. It's like, we need more women doing bench science. We need more women kind of asking the questions. We need more collaboration of clinicians and researchers. And if you look at females in sport, it's the same parallel. Women were just trying to perform. They basically thought they were done after they had a baby. And now we've got women returning back. And then there was the whole period of time where like Kara Goucher went back at 2 weeks postpartum working for Nike and they refused to pay her. And then, okay, finally we're going to pay them. Can we, give them lactation support? Can we pay them during their maternity leave? All these things. It's been a huge parallel. And the reason we don't have this stuff, because we were just getting a seat at the table.
Yeah.
Our moms had cheerleading.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's it.
Yep.
We were kind of like, I was a 3-sport athlete, didn't think anything of it.
Me too. Yeah.
Wasn't not our mom's situation.
No.
So
Yeah.
when you ask those questions, like the history is short,
Yeah.
but we're finally like, hey, it's not a moment, it's a movement right now for kind of women activity, women's health, kind of all sorts of things.
Yeah.
But if you're just new to it, I can understand the urgency. But a few of us, I think you included, have been working at this a little
Yeah.
while.
A little bit. Couple of
Don't
decades.
forget the last, I don't know, 30 years.
Well, and I loved what you said there, Carrie, about the practitioners, the clinicians, and the researchers needing to collaborate because
Yeah,
I'm doing that, and it's
yep,
so fun.
it
So
is.
fun. And people who know me, they're like, "I can't believe you're saying that, Lynn," because I'm not that research, Carrie, I have to admit, I love the data, but I don't always understand. I don't have that critical mind to
Mhm.
look at the data. I don't understand statistics to really, like
That's
understand.
why I have friends who do.
Right. Well, and I depend on my
Yeah.
friends who have that critical mind
Mhm.
to let me know, like, hey, what's this paper really trying to tell
Right.
me?
Yep.
And I love Taryn Hallam for that.
Yes.
Oh my gosh, she's so special to our profession.
Yep.
Because that my mind doesn't work that way, and we need to go where our strengths are.
Mhm.
But I am partnering with 2 professors, and we
Awesome.
are looking at this open birthing pattern of the pelvis, and really, we're starting off by really identifying it. Like, is it a thing? Can we measure it? Can we?
Well, that's the whole other thing. I had a conversation with Linda McLean. She's at the MFM lab, I think in Ottawa, a couple weeks ago, and we were talking about we need more women in kind of biological engineering, kind of to create
Yeah.
like we need ways to measure what we actually want to measure. And
Yep.
if you go back to things that we've used as clinicians historically, like biofeedback, for example,
Mhm.
um, everybody can relate to using the external biofeedback or even the internal, and you're getting this weird reading because guess what? The patient's sitting on an electric high-low table and you're getting all the feedback from that. And you're getting broad-based information. Great.
Yeah.
It's not specific. And so when people are like, oh, well, we have the ability to measure that, I'm like, do we have this? Are we measuring what we think we're measuring? What assumptions are we making?
Right.
And we just have a long ways to go on like, how do you measure pressure and pelvic floor activity in somebody who's running or jumping or like
Right.
without hurting them? Like don't stick needles in my pelvic floor while I run. Like, how do you work? But you know who's going to solve that? A woman.
Yeah.
It's not going to be a dude. It's
No.
not going to be a
No.
dude.
Yeah. 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 We need more girls to go into
Women
STEM
in
and help
STEM
us.
will
Yeah.
save the world.
Yes, 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 yes. Oh my gosh, so
Yeah.
true. Yeah, and it's so frustrating on that research level because it's like I see this in the clinic,
Mhm,
but yet are we going to be able to, I see it in the clinic, I get good results with what I'm doing in the clinic.
mhm.
Will it show up in the research? Will it show up in the data or
Well,
not?
and that was a question that we had because I mean, let's take stress urinary incontinence and pelvic organ prolapse for example. For a very very long time, we're like, oh, it's weak muscles, it's weak muscles, and then I think there was a turn and shift saying, okay, maybe it's overactivity.
Yeah.
And even kind of carrying that over, now we're looking at prolapse differently. Like it's not just like we can have a woman with no visible anatomical prolapse, but they very much can have symptoms. What's going on with that person? And I asked Linda flat out, I was like, we're thinking it's this, is it overactivity because they're responding to the same kind of treatment? And she's like, here's the thing, which I really appreciated as a clinician, is she's like, your explanation might not be right, but that doesn't invalidate your treatment. And I was like, okay, I can get behind that because clearly what we're doing is impacting symptoms um, where it wasn't before. But that doesn't necessarily mean that my explanation is right, but I don't need to have the perfect explanation to impact my patient, which sounds confusing, but
Yeah. I-
I don't need to know everything in order to help my patient.
Okay.
Which again, that goes back to being in your 40s and 50s. Like, hey, I don't have to know everything. I
Hey,
don't
as
have
long
to
as
have
I'm
it
getting good
perfect.
results. Yeah.
Exactly, exactly. And so, we need to keep asking the questions. But I think, and this is hard when you're a newer clinician, is you think that we have all the answers and everything's black or white, and it's not.
No.
My way of maybe explaining something to a patient right now might be completely different a couple years from now because of
Absolutely.
we're able to measure something or learn something different. My treatment may be the same,
Yeah.
but how, what actually is going on might be completely different than what I think is happening, which
Yeah.
is
Well,
okay.
I love Anthony Lowe's role in our PT world is to really question everything,
Hmm.
and to say he's not going to question your results. He may
Hmm.
question your understanding and your
Right.
why you think something is doing what it's doing because
Yeah.
we truly don't know.
No. And I think the more you stick your pole in the ground and the more you get kind of defensive about your reasoning, that's when really you should be questioning it. Like don't know. It's okay. And the
Right.
the
Right.
most freeing thing I can say to a patient is like, I'm not exactly sure what's going on here, but this is kind of what I'm seeing. And so let's try this. Let's see if this works. This can tell us a little bit more. Like
Yeah.
it's okay to not know everything. That doesn't mean that we can't still move forward and get kind of what the goal is of treatment.
Yeah. I think that's so important for newer practitioners to hear.
Yep.
So, so
Yep.
important. So thank you for
Well,
sharing that.
I remember thinking, this is back when I was doing orthopedics in the beginning of my career. We had a shoulder surgeon. I was terrified of their nurse practitioner, and she would send an order on exactly what we're supposed to do. And I had this idea in my head that they would know if I didn't know what I was doing
Oh.
because they knew all the things, which could not be further from the truth.
Right?
And now I look back at that, I'm like, oh my God. I was so naive, but she would get really mad if a patient didn't get better, and she just assumed that, we didn't know what we were doing. I'm like, well, you probably don't either.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
There's so much. I mean, the more I'm into it, the more I realize there's so many different factors that fall into healing.
yeah.
And it's not just the physical.
Mm-mm.
So there's so much more that can be going on that creates
Yeah.
or inhibits someone from really healing fully. So, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. So, I love this because I think, I I guess I'm really concerned about those practitioners who are diehards with the research and are only going to do what the research says.
Mhm.
And, because I think that that's limiting us as practitioners. And I, I,
Yeah, I mean, again, I think it's a mindset. It's growth versus fixed mindset, to be quite honest with you. And again, having two young kids, it's interesting to see what comes naturally and what we need to develop.
yeah,
We come out of school with a certain set of information and told that we can handle everything. And I don't know about you, but I have yet to see a patient in 25 years that's exactly what I read in a book. Um, and I think that's terrifying if you're brand new. I think it's incredibly freeing if you're not, because um, and this is where I kind of make a delineation between evidence based versus evidence informed. Is like we can read and use what we know in the literature to make our decisions, also based upon our experience and what else we know about that patient, and so on and so forth. Um, and if you find yourself being so rigid, and I say this to my PT students as well, is like, are you a technician, or are you, working at the highest level of your profession with a doctorate degree that you paid all this money to have an opinion?
yes, yes,
Have an opinion. And there's a lot of variables, and it allows you to be a good critical thinker and think outside the box. And and that's really fun. And I think in pelvic PT, like that's been what's kept me in, because we have our hands in so many cookie jars and we can kind of pull the parts and pieces. And I mean, take, for example, prolapse, like how we understand prolapse now compared to, my level one training in 2001. Like,
wow,
um, it's just, I think even how we understand the anatomy is so different. Like this idea that it's a hammock. No, it's this whole three-dimensional multifactorial thing. And when you understand that, then it starts to change, the concept of prolapse from this very basic, like, okay, the hammock isn't holding up the organ. Well, it doesn't work like that at all.
right.
And then how do you overlap that with something like running? And again, like I can look to the research to say, I know that the pelvic floor, has different muscle strategies throughout running. Also know that the pelvic floor, whether you're symptomatic or asymptomatic, we're going to have hiatus changes, we're going to have length changes, we're going to have all these things. So, what do I do with that information? But at the end of the day, I'm going back and looking for, what am I going to do that's going to change that person's symptoms? And I think that's the hard part, is like knowing all this stuff, like how do we pull this together into something meaningful that's going to matter for that person in front of us? And again, completely different than how I treated 3 years ago, 5 years ago,
Oh,
and definitely 25 years ago.
for
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Well, Carrie, this has been amazing. And I know I would love to continue talking to you forever, but we're going to go ahead and wrap up this episode. Is there any last piece of advice or information that you want listeners to know?
Yeah. I mean, I think the most important thing is the answer's out there somewhere, that you're looking for, whether you're a provider or, patient or that sort of thing. And it's finding that person that resonates with you. And that's going to take a lot of the stuff that we've talked about into consideration. Like it's not black and white. It's a lot of gray. It's not, an on-off switch. It's a dimmer switch. Like, and so finding people to kind of work through those nuances, or help you figure out problem solving or that kind of stuff. Like, that's where the answers lie. And it can be incredibly fun and incredibly frustrating, but and then we still have more to learn, which is super fun.
Right.
Which is
Right.
why we'll see, which is why you're clearly still in it, which is why I'm clearly still in it.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
It's cool stuff. So whether you're, a patient or provider,
Yeah.
it's cool.
Well, we all need to be lifelong learners. And
Hmm.
also, I really want to encourage everyone to trust that gut, trust your instinct. Like,
Yeah.
don't let it, and try not to question yourself when you've gone through something.
Yeah. No, and honestly, like to kind of wrap up here, like that to me, because I've gone through so many of these things personally, and I've been very open about my own issues with leakage and prolapse and diastasis. Like, if it weren't for my frustration and my like, hey, this can't be the rest of my life. I'm not going to sit here and just accept this. I'm going to go find solutions that I'm sure somebody else is going to want to. That's what's continued to drive this for me. So I think for me, I never stop understanding or wanting to learn about it because it is personal for me. But then it's very much, it's literally been the work of my entire life. So that doesn't good news, bad news. I wouldn't wish it on anybody, but at the same time, it really drives the learning.
Right? Yeah. Oh, Carrie, thank you so
Yeah,
much for sharing all that you did today, and
sure.
for just giving us your time and your wisdom and everything. So thank you for being your own N of one.
Yeah.
So you can help us all understand as well. So,
Absolutely,
uh,
absolutely.
all right. Thanks everybody for listening in. So grateful that you're here. And please share this podcast with others. And we look forward to seeing you on the next episode. Here is to smooth births and faster recoveries. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.
Today's podcast was brought to you by the Institute for Birth Healing. To discover more, visit instituteforbirthhealing.com. To claim $50 off of any online course, use coupon code podcast50 at checkout. Till next time, I'm Lynn Schulte, founder of the Institute for Birth Healing.